Tigers. I wanted to do a final send off for our sixth grade year, 2020, by reading you a very special book. This book is about Albert Einstein. But before I do that, I want to read to you this quote that I have on my computer. He says, "Everyone is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." I want you to think about that. Boys and girls, curiosity is a very important trait. And so we want you to go forward and to continue to question and be curious in all your endeavors throughout middle school, high school, and post-high school, whatever that looks like for you. And know that no question is ever a stupid question. Let me read this book to you. It is awesome, it is inspiring, and it's a classic. On a Beam of Light, a story of Albert Einstein. Over 100 years ago, as the stars swirled in the sky, as the earth circled the sun, as the March winds blew through a little town by a river, a baby boy was born. His parents named him Albert. Albert turned 1 year old and didn't say a word. Albert turned 2 and didn't say a word. Albert turned 3 and hardly said a word at all. He just looked around with his big, curious eyes, looked and wondered, looked and wondered. So different, but so dear. His parents worried. Little Albert was so different. Was there something wrong? But he was their baby, so they loved him, no matter what. One day when Albert was sick in bed, his father brought him a compass, a small round case with a magnetic needle inside. No matter which way Albert turned the compass, the needle always pointed north. As if held by an invisible hand, Albert was so amazed his body trembled. Suddenly he knew there were mysteries in the world, hidden and silent, unknown and unseen. He wanted more than anything to understand those mysteries. Here's Albert with that compass. Albert started asking questions at home, questions at school, so many questions that some of his teachers told him he was a disruption to class. They said he would never amount to anything unless he learned to behave like all the other students. But Albert didn't want to be like the other students. He wanted to discover the hidden mysteries in the world. Here he is getting in trouble from his teacher. Some of us can relate to that part. One day, as Albert was zipping through the countryside on his bicycle, he looked up at the beams of sunlight speeding from the sun to the earth. He wondered, what would it be like to ride one of those beams? And in his mind, right then and there, Albert was no longer on his bicycle, no longer on the country road. He was racing through space on a beam of light. It was the biggest, most exciting thought Albert had ever had, and it filled his mind with questions. Albert was very curious. Look at him chasing that beam of light. Albert began to read and study. He read about light and sound, about heat and magnetism, and about gravity, the invisible force that pulls us down towards our planet, and he keeps the moon from floating away into outer space. This is young Albert studying. Wow, you can tell his character is that of someone that's very intense. He's very focused. And he read about numbers. Albert loved numbers. They were like a secret language for figuring things out. But all that reading still didn't answer all of Albert's questions. So he kept on reading, wondering, and learning. He was a thinker. When Albert graduated from college, he wanted to teach the subjects he loved, all the things he had read about all those years, but Albert couldn't find a job as a teacher, so he got another job. A simple, quiet job in a government office, an office where he worked with other people's ideas and inventions. He did his work very well and very quickly, so quickly that he had lots of extra time to think and wonder. So Albert wanted to be a teacher, but it didn't work out for Albert. He didn't give up on his dream. Remember how we talked about how we have to be flexible and adaptable? That is how Albert was with his first job. So now, this is his new place of work. Not ideally what he wanted at first. After Albert watched a lump of sugar dissolve and disappear into his hot tea, he asked himself, how could this happen? He watched the smoke from his pipe swirl and disappear into the air. How could one thing disappear into another? There's young Albert just thinking. Albert's not so young anymore, though, is he? Thinking. Then he began to figure it out. He thought about the idea that everything is made out of teeny tiny moving bits of stuff, far too tiny to see, little bits called atoms. Some people didn't believe that atoms existed, but Albert's figuring helped prove that everything in the world is made of atoms. Even sugar and tea, even smoke and air, even Albert and you, even this book is made of atoms. Everything. Then Albert thought about motion. He realized that everything is always moving through space, moving through time. Even sound asleep, we're moving as our planet circles the sun and our lives travel into the future. Albert saw time and space as no one had before. It seems like Albert, he thinks of a lot of things, a lot of discoveries that no one ever even thought of before. Albert wrote down his new ideas, put them into envelopes, and sent them to science magazines. The magazines printed everything Albert sent. He hoped that scientists and professors would be interested, and they were very interested indeed. They asked Albert to come work with them and teach with them. For the first time in his life, people started to say, Albert is a genius. Now, Albert could spend all his days doing what he loved, imagining, wondering, figuring, and thinking. Albert thought about very, very big things, like the size and shape of the entire universe. He thought about very, very small things, like what goes on inside the atoms that everything is made of. He thought about mysterious forces, like magnetism and gravity. He discovered whole new ways to understand how all these things work. Everywhere Albert went, he would think and think and think. One of Albert's favorite thinking places was his little sailboat. He loved to let his mind wander as the wind blew him across the water. Look at Albert sailing on his sailboat, thinking and being curious and wondering. Sometimes when Albert was having a tough time and a tricky problem, he would put it aside and play his violin. Music made Albert happy. He said it helped him think better. Do you have something that you do to help you think better? Think about that. We have to follow our passions. This is Albert playing the violin. Albert even chose his clothes for thinking. His favorites were his comfy old saggy baggy sweaters and pants and shoes without socks. He said now that he was grown up, no one could tell him to put his socks on. My feet are happier without socks. And look at him with no socks. That might be hard for us to relate to, but you can tell that Albert Einstein is a very unique individual. In the town where he lived, he became known for wandering around, deep in thought, sometimes eating an ice cream cone, always recognizable with his long, wild hair, which by then had become quite white. Here he is eating his ice cream. I don't think that Albert Einstein really cared what people thought about him. He seemed very comfortable in his skin. Everywhere Albert went, he tried to figure out the secrets of the universe, and he never forgot about the beam of light that he rode so long ago in his imagination. Albert figured out that no person, no thing could ever zoom through space as fast as a beam of light. He figured that if he could travel near the speed of light, crazy things would happen. Only minutes would pass for Albert, while years and years went by for the rest of us. This idea was so amazing. People didn't believe it at first, but scientists today have proven that it is true. Albert thought and figured until the very last minute of the very last day of his life. He asked questions never asked before. He found answers never found before, and dreamed up ideas never dreamt before. Albert's ideas helped build spaceships and satellites that travel to the moon and beyond. His thinking helped us understand our universe as no one ever had before. But still, Albert left us many big questions. Questions that scientists are working on today. Albert Einstein died in 1955. And like they said, he was thinking and thinking till the very end. Questions that someday you may answer by wondering, thinking, and imagining. That's right. The questions that scientists are working on today. You are our future, boys and girls. These are questions that someday you may answer by wondering, thinking, and imagining. So, hopefully, your big takeaway is that knowledge truly is power, and it is good to be very curious. So, keep asking those questions, keep growing, and remember, the important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. There's a genius in each of you. Follow your passion and know that our time in 6th grade was very dear to me. And this is my send off to you. Dream big.